Hello everyone. Before we jump in, make sure to hit like, subscribe to the channel, and drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. That way, YouTube knows to keep sharing more stories like this with you. Now, let's get started. I don't know why I'm even writing this out, because even after all this time it still makes my chest tighten and my skin crawl to think about it. Maybe I need to put it all down so I can get it out of my head, but part of me knows I'll never forget the night it happened no matter how many years go by. This wasn't a dream. It wasn't something I made up to sound dramatic. It's something that really happened, and even now when I go for walks around here I sometimes catch myself tensing up, scanning the tree line, expecting to hear that sound again. I live in southern West Virginia, and I've been here my whole life. The woods and the mountains are all I've ever known. During the day they're beautiful. When the sunlight cuts through the ridges and hits the trees, when the air feels clean and quiet, it feels like a place you'd never want to leave. But at night, it's something else. The dark here isn't like the dark in town. It's heavier, deeper. You can't just squint and make out shapes. Once the sun is gone, the trees swallow the light whole. Every sound stands out more than it should, and your imagination has too much space to work. This happened maybe 2 or 3 years ago, late one night. I was with a friend of mine I'll call Mark. He was at my house, like usual, and we were just doing the same things we always did when he came over, watching UFC fights, messing around on Xbox, just wasting time. By the time we got bored enough to think of something else, it was really late. I'm guessing it was around 1 in the morning. That's when we decided to take a walk on a nearby trail to smoke a joint. This trail wasn't far from my place, and it wasn't long either, but the woods it cut through were thick. You could walk it during the day and still feel that weight of the trees pressing in from both sides. At night, it was different. The path was narrow, with brush close to the edges, and once you were far enough in, there was no sign of anything else. No lights from houses, no sound of cars on the road. Just you, the dirt path under your feet, and the woods that always seemed alive with noise. We started walking, taking our time. I remember the air was cool but not cold. The kind of damp chill you get late at night in the hills. The gravel and dirt crunched under our shoes, and our breath fogged faintly in front of us, though not enough to really notice unless you were looking. I could smell the wet leaves and the faint rot of the forest floor, the same smell I'd known my whole life but sharper that night somehow. It took us about half an hour to get to the spot we usually stopped at, around the halfway point of the trail. We stood there for a while, packed the joint, and smoked, leaning against the trees and trying to relax. At first, everything felt normal. The woods were alive that night, more than usual. I remember how loud it seemed. The rustling in the underbrush, the hoots of owls, the random crack of twigs snapping somewhere unseen. I'd been in the woods countless times, and it had never felt quite like this. It wasn't just background noise. It felt like everything was moving, like every creature out there was restless. That unsettled me a little, but not enough to make me nervous yet. Around here, animals move through all the time. Deer, raccoons, foxes, even coyotes sometimes. The sounds of animals never really scared me. What got to me was what happened after. We finished smoking and started back along the trail. Almost as soon as we began walking, the forest fell dead quiet. It wasn't a slow fade. It was immediate, like somebody had flipped a switch. The noises that had filled every second, the rustle of animals, the insects buzzing, the owls, everything stopped at once. I've been in the woods plenty, and I know that silence. It's what happens when something bigger moves through, when prey animals freeze because they sense danger. But this felt different. It was so sudden, so complete, that it made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. And then came the sound. A voice. Not loud, not clear, but enough to make my stomach twist. It was shaky, uneven, almost like it was mocking the sound of a human voice, but not quite getting it right. Imagine the way an old broken toy might sound, with a cracked speaker and a robotic tone that rises and falls unnaturally. That's what it reminded me of. It didn't sound real. We froze, both of us, but the second that sound carried through the trees, instinct kicked in. We bolted. Neither of us said anything. We just ran as hard as we could down the trail, away from the sound. My chest burned, and my legs felt like they were made of stone, but fear drove me harder than I thought I could run. But here's what made it worse: the voice didn't fade. No matter how far we ran, it stayed at the same distance, the same volume, repeating in that broken, rising and falling way. It wasn't closer, but it wasn't farther either. It followed us without moving. I don't know how else to explain it. That kind of fear is hard to describe unless you've felt it. The kind that makes your body act before your brain even catches up. The kind that makes you think about survival and nothing else. I don't know how long we ran, but it felt endless. My chest was on fire, my throat burned, and my legs shook with every step. Still, we didn't stop until the trail started to open up again, and I could see the faintest change in the darkness ahead, where the path came closer to the exit. I thought that maybe once we were out, it would stop, that we could breathe again. Then it happened. A scream. Not an animal scream. Not the sound of a mountain lion or a coyote or anything I've ever heard before. I know those sounds, and I could recognize them instantly. This wasn't like that. This was human, but not in the way it should have been. It was bone-shaking, violent, the kind of scream that makes your whole body tense because some deep part of you knows it means danger. It was filled with something that felt depraved, like it carried rage or hatred in it. The sound came from directly behind us, close enough that I could feel it in my chest. Birds exploded from the trees, wings beating frantically in the night air, and I swear I felt the ground vibrate under my feet from the force of the sound. My stomach dropped. For a split second, I couldn't move at all. I felt paralyzed, like my body just locked up. And then I ran harder than I ever have in my life. Mark was right there with me, and neither of us looked back. We just sprinted with everything we had left, crashing down the trail, stumbling over rocks and roots, gasping for breath. The scream didn't come again, but I didn't need it to. Once was enough to lodge itself in my head forever. By the time we got out of the trail, my whole body was trembling. My lungs hurt. My vision felt like it was narrowing. I didn't care about anything except getting to the car. The path from the trail exit to the car was only about 5 more minutes, but it felt like miles. Every step felt heavy, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had screamed was still back there, waiting in the dark, maybe even following just out of sight. When we finally reached the car, we dove in, slammed the doors shut, and just sat there. My hands shook so bad I could barely hold the keys. I remember the silence of the car being almost painful, because my ears were still ringing with that scream. My chest was still tight, and my mind kept replaying it over and over, refusing to let it fade. We didn't talk about it after. Not then, not on the drive home. And honestly, not much at all in the years since. I've only told a few people, and most of them just brushed it off like I was exaggerating, or like I wanted to believe it was something unnatural. I've never been the type to believe in ghosts or monsters, and I still don't know what it was. I just know it wasn't an animal. I know the woods here, I know their sounds, and this was something else. Something wrong. Even now, writing this, I can hear it in my head if I let myself. That crackling, broken voice that wouldn't fade no matter how far we ran. That scream that felt like it tore through more than just the trees, like it dug into me. I don't go to that trail anymore. I don't even like being near it at night. I can't explain what it was. Maybe I'll never know. All I know is that night in the woods, something was out there with us, and it wasn't something I ever want to meet again. I grew up in a place where silence carried further than words, a place where the nights felt heavier than the days, where every sound, an owl hooting, a stray dog barking, even the slow groan of the trees in the wind, would travel through the empty stretches of land like it was magnified. My home sat on the edge of the countryside, in one of those spots that wasn't completely cut off from the rest of the world, but also wasn't close enough to feel like you were part of it. There were neighbors, yes, but you couldn't see them unless you stepped outside and looked across the fields, or through the thin line of woods. It wasn't city life, not even close. It was quiet country, the type of place where you always knew who lived where, and you could point to a house in the distance and name the family that slept inside. Behind my house, maybe 100 yards or so down the slope of the land, stood another home. It belonged to a family that had lived there for years. The parents were middle-aged, hard-working people, the kind who always waved when they drove by and kept mostly to themselves. Their grown daughter lived with them, a woman probably in her early 30s who I had seen a handful of times but never really spoken to. They weren't the closest neighbors, but close enough that I could see the faint glow of their kitchen light at night if I looked out my window when the air was clear. That night, the night that stayed with me more than any other, started out like every other. It was summer, the air heavy and warm, even when the sun went down. The kind of night where the insects screamed from every direction, the cicadas, crickets, and frogs all making a wall of sound. I had fallen asleep late, with my window cracked open just a bit to let in whatever breeze there was. Midnight crept by without me knowing it, until something stirred me awake. At first, I didn't know why I was up. I just knew that my room felt different. The air wasn't moving anymore. It was still suffocating. My eyes opened slowly, the faint blue of moonlight leaking through the window across the floor. I remember blinking hard, trying to understand what had shifted, when I noticed the smell. Smoke. Not thick, not choking, but sharp enough to cut through the heavy night air. I sat up quickly, my heart already thudding, because smoke in the country was never a good sign. You thought of barns, of dry fields, of houses where people slept too deeply to know what was happening around them. I went to the window and pushed it open wider. The smell rushed in harder now, bitter and dry, wrapping itself around me. Then I saw it, a glow that didn't belong to the moon, flickering at the edge of my sight. I leaned out and turned my head, and there it was, the house behind mine, the neighbor's house, the one just down the hill. It was on fire. Flames were climbing up the side of the structure, licking at the roof, bright orange and alive against the black of the night. The smoke rose in twisting, violent columns, filling the air above like storm clouds made from ash. My chest tightened as I stared. It didn't feel real at first. The way the fire moved, how fast it grew, how loud it seemed even from where I stood. It was like something out of a nightmare. I didn't think. I just pulled on my boots, grabbed a flashlight, and stumbled outside. The air hit me hard, hot and sharp with the sting of burning wood and plastic. The night was alive now, the insects drowned out by the deep roar of the flames. I could hear shouting too, voices carrying across the field, raw and panicked. I hurried down, my flashlight beam bouncing ahead of me across the grass, but I barely needed it. The fire lit everything in a strange, terrible daylight. When I reached a point about 15 yards from the house, I stopped. My body wouldn't let me get closer. The heat pressed against me, and my eyes watered. From where I stood, I could see the family outside, the parents shouting, their daughter standing with them. They were safe, or at least away from the fire, but I could see the wild panic in their movements, the way the mother clutched at her daughter's arm, the way the father paced, helpless against something too big to fight. I stood there frozen, watching, wanting to help but knowing there was nothing I could do but witness. That's when it happened. I don't know how long I had been standing there before I noticed her. A presence at my side, so close that for a split second I thought maybe someone else from down the road had come running too. I felt the hairs on my neck rise before I even turned. Then my eyes caught her, just at the edge of my vision. A woman, standing right beside me. She was dressed in a solid white nightgown, the kind you'd expect to see in an old photograph, long and loose. Her hair was gray, long, unkempt, spilling down her shoulders. She didn't look at me, didn't move, just stood there with her face turned toward the fire. My chest locked up as I tried to process her sudden presence. The way she was there without me hearing a single footstep. I snapped my head back toward the flames, trying to catch my breath, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. And then, as quick as that, I turned my head back. She was gone. Not walking away, not fading into the shadows. Just gone. The space beside me was empty. I stood there, frozen in the smoke and heat, my flashlight beam shaking in my hand. My throat felt dry, my stomach twisted. I wasn't one to believe in ghosts, not even a little, but there was no denying what I thought I saw. The image of her burned into my mind sharper than the fire itself. I stayed a little longer, just watching, making sure the family was still together and safe, before finally backing away toward my own house. I felt like I couldn't breathe, like the smoke had filled my chest and lodged itself there. I went inside and sat at my kitchen table, my body still trembling. The sound of the fire carried through the night for what felt like forever, and I could still smell it long after the flames had died down. For days after, I couldn't shake it. I replayed it again and again. The woman, the nightgown, the gray hair, the way she vanished when I looked away. I tried to reason with myself, to put it into words that made sense. Smoke plays tricks on the eyes. Light from the fire makes shadows stretch and bend. When you're standing in shock, your mind can invent things. I told myself all of that, but it didn't matter. The memory stayed the same. Weeks later, I learned something that put the whole night into a different kind of perspective. The woman who lived there, the daughter I'd seen from a distance before, she always wore white to bed. Neighbors said she often walked the property at night, restless, when she couldn't sleep. Her hair wasn't gray though, it was dark, and she had been standing with her parents when I saw them outside. But the fact that my mind latched onto those details made me realize how easy it was for panic, smoke, and exhaustion to twist things together. I never saw the figure again. Not on nights when I walked outside, not when the fog hung low over the fields, not when the moonlight stretched across the grass. That night was the only time. Even now, I don't call it a ghost story. I call it a memory of a fire, a night of panic, and a vision born from smoke and fear. My brain was trying to make sense of too much at once, the glow, the shouting, the heat pressing in from every direction. And maybe in the chaos, it stitched together an image that felt real enough to burn itself into me. But I know this much. When I think of that fire, I don't just remember the roar of the flames or the smell of the smoke. I remember standing there, 15 yards away, and feeling like I wasn't alone. And no matter how much I explain it away, no matter how rational I try to be, that feeling has never really left me. It happened about 15 years ago, though the memory has stuck with me in a way that still unsettles me to this day. We were just kids then, still young enough that the evenings were filled with games instead of responsibilities, yet old enough to roam further than the edge of our yards without parents worrying too much. That particular night we were playing one of our usual games, something like manhunt or ball tag. I can't remember which one exactly, but it was the kind of game where hiding well could win everything. The sun had just gone down over the horizon, leaving that strange in-between light where the open areas still seemed clear, but the woods around us had already darkened into heavy shadow. It was that time of day where your eyes trick you. Out in the field, you could make out faces and details, but just a few steps into the trees, everything seemed swallowed by darkness. Me and one of my closest friends decided to slip away from the main group. We figured the others would waste their time searching the open spaces while we could vanish into the woods and keep out of sight. We climbed up a small hill that sat at the edge of the treeline and slid down into a shallow dip in the ground. It was like a natural little trench or divot, just deep enough that when we laid flat, our heads barely peeked over the rim. From there we could see everything. The field stretched out below us, our other friends spread across it, their figures moving in different directions as they called out and scanned the area, trying to flush us out. It was the perfect hiding place. We whispered nothing. We didn't dare give ourselves away. Just lying there, pressed against the cool ground, feeling the dampness of the soil through my clothes, I thought about how clever we were for picking that spot. The woods behind us were silent in a way that only woods can be at that time of day. Not quiet exactly, because there's always noise, crickets, a distant bird, leaves shifting with the faintest breeze, but that still, muffled quiet where everything seems just beyond hearing. The air was cooler there, the smell of dirt and pine mixing together, while out in the field the last streaks of sunlight made everything look golden. It was then, while we kept our eyes on the others, that I heard it. At first, I thought I had imagined it. A faint, rhythmic sound that seemed so out of place with the stillness of the woods. My friend shifted slightly beside me, and I could tell from the way his body tensed that he heard it too. It wasn't the kind of sound you could ignore, not like a squirrel moving through leaves or a branch snapping under its own weight. This was something deliberate, a beat, steady and even like a drum. Not loud at first, just far enough that it almost blended with the background noise. But it was there, pulsing from somewhere deeper in the trees. I remember holding my breath, trying to focus my ears. The sound grew clearer the longer we listened. A low thump, repeating steadily, followed by something else, like the faint swish of a rain stick, that cascading sound of beads or seeds tumbling down wood. It gave the impression of movement, of many steps pushing forward in unison. My skin prickled with goosebumps before my mind even caught up. It didn't fit with where we were, with the ordinary summer evening game we were playing. The sound carried a weight to it, like a rhythm that had been repeated for centuries. Then came something else, something I can only describe as voices. Not talking, not in any language I could understand, but rising and falling like chanting. It wasn't harsh or violent, but it was steady, patterned, purposeful. It had the same cadence as the drumbeat, as if the two were tied together. And mixed in with it all was a sound that made my stomach twist, the sharp, unmistakable wail of bagpipes. It was strange because it wasn't out of tune or unpleasant. In any other situation it would have been beautiful, even moving, but in that moment, with the shadows thickening around us and the field glowing faintly in the distance, it sounded wrong. Like it didn't belong. The music grew louder, layering over itself, the bagpipes rising above the drum, the chant weaving through it all, the rain stick sound brushing in the background. I couldn't tell how far away it was. It didn't sound like a stereo or a recording. There was depth to it, an echo like it was moving through the trees. It seemed alive, not like something coming from a single speaker, but like an actual group, as if a procession was making its way just beyond our sight. My mind struggled to understand it. Part of me wanted to believe it was some kind of trick, maybe other kids in the neighborhood messing around, but deep down I knew it wasn't. It didn't have that clumsy, playful feel. It had weight, order, something old in it. I remember my heart racing so fast it hurt. My ears strained to pick out details while my eyes scanned the darkness behind us, trying desperately to make out shapes, movement, anything that could explain it. But there was nothing. No torches, no lanterns, no figures moving between the trees. Just the sound, growing clearer and stronger, filling the woods behind us with something we couldn't see. Every instinct in my body told me to run, but fear rooted me there. If I stood up, if I made noise, I was certain something would notice. My friend shifted again, and I could feel the panic in his body even without looking at him. We didn't need to speak. We both knew something was wrong. And then as suddenly as it began, it stopped. Not faded, not trailed off, it just ended. 1 second the woods were alive with sound. The next they were dead silent. The silence was worse than the noise. It was heavy, suffocating, like the air had been sucked out of the space around us. For a few seconds, I thought my ears had failed, that maybe I had gone deaf because it felt unnatural. No crickets, no breeze, no sound at all. Just me, my friend, and the knowledge that something had happened that we couldn't explain. The fear broke loose inside me, and without thinking I jumped to my feet. My friend did the same. We didn't look back, we didn't speak. We just bolted. The hill we had climbed suddenly felt higher and steeper as we scrambled down it. My legs pumped as hard as they could, hitting the slope, launching off the edge. It must have been a 9 or 10-foot drop to the ground below, but adrenaline made me reckless. I remember the hard impact of my feet slamming into the dirt, my knees jarring from the shock, my body stumbling forward as I tried to keep my balance. Ahead of us, our friends in the field weren't running toward us. They were already running away, toward the house, as if they had heard the same thing. I saw them glance back in our direction, wide-eyed, before they sprinted. That only fueled my panic. If they had heard it too, if they were scared enough to run without waiting, then it wasn't just me and my friend imagining things. We weren't losing our minds. Something had been real. We sprinted across the open space, the field feeling far too wide, too exposed, as though something might reach out of the trees and grab us before we made it. The glow from the house was the only anchor, the only safe place left in the world. By the time we reached it, my chest burned, my lungs clawing for air, sweat sticking to my skin even though the evening was cool. We didn't stop until we were close enough to the porch lights to feel protected. The others were already there, their faces pale, their bodies restless with nervous energy. No one shouted, no one joked. We spoke only in hushed tones, voices low as if raising them might invite the sound back. The rest of the night was a blur of unease. We didn't go back into the woods, not even close. We sat together, whispering about what we had heard, turning it over and over, trying to make sense of it. But every explanation fell apart the more we thought about it. There were no houses nearby, no celebrations, no festivals with drums or bagpipes. There was nothing out there but woods and hills, land that had been there long before any of us were born. And yet we had all heard it, clear, undeniable, impossible to forget. Even now, years later, I can close my eyes and hear it again. That steady drum, that rolling rain stick, that strange, haunting mix of chanting and bagpipes weaving through the night. It wasn't music that belonged to the moment, not to the game we were playing or the place we were in. It was something older, something that didn't care whether we understood it or not. And when it stopped, when the silence fell heavy and absolute, it left behind a feeling that still makes my stomach twist when I think about it. I never heard it again. None of us did. But the memory of that night, of lying in that shallow dip on the edge of the woods, will never leave me. It was the one time in my life when the world around me shifted, when something unexplainable brushed against the edges of my ordinary childhood and left me with more questions than answers. And though I've thought about it countless times, replayed it over and over, I've never found a reason that fits. All I know is that we heard it, we felt it, and we ran because some part of us understood we weren't supposed to be there when it passed through. I still remember that evening on Big Frog Mountain, and no matter how much time passes, I can still feel the weight of it sitting in my chest. It was one of those late summer days when the air clings to your skin, heavy with humidity, and the sun drops faster than you think it will. We were miles from anyone, far up the mountain where the gravel road wound through thick forest and the shadows grew long. I had been up there before, but this time was different. This time I wasn't alone. I was with a girl, and at that age everything felt sharper and more important. Every glance, every word, every touch. We had driven up there because it felt private, far enough away from the world that we could just exist without anyone looking over our shoulders. By the time we parked, dusk was already settling in. The sun had dipped low enough that the ridge lines glowed faintly, and the hollows in the trees filled with darkness. The stillness of the place was the first thing I noticed. No wind, no cars, not even the sound of another person anywhere around us. When we got out of the car, I stepped right into a puddle behind the rear tire. The water splashed up onto my shoe, and I looked down, annoyed at first, but then confused. The water wasn't the dark brown I expected from mountain mud. It was pale, almost light brown, like coffee diluted with too much milk. Something about it didn't look right. I bent down and stared at it for a moment, letting my foot sink slightly, then pulled it out. I remember pointing it out, saying how strange it looked, because water on that mountain usually ran clear. Even muddy puddles from rain never looked like that. But after a second glance, I brushed it off. It was just water, I told myself. We decided to walk up the trail, just a short distance. The air was cooler under the trees, the smell of damp leaves and dirt rising around us as the path curved uphill. I kept my hands in my pockets, trying to act relaxed, but the truth was I felt uneasy almost immediately. There was something about the silence. The woods were supposed to have sounds, crickets, the occasional rustle of small animals, but it was quiet in a way that made the hair on my arms stand up. I didn't want to admit it, but I felt watched. She slowed down before I did. Her steps grew smaller, less certain. I didn't want to pressure her to keep going, so when she suggested heading back, I agreed right away, even though I didn't say much. We got back to the car, and once we were inside, it felt safer, like the metal around us was some kind of shield. Darkness was creeping in fast. The trees outside had turned into tall, black outlines against a sky that was fading from blue to gray. I slid into the driver's seat, and she leaned against me, the kind of closeness teenagers cling to when everything feels new and exciting. We lay across the front seats, and before long we were making out, caught up in the heat of the moment. She had her arm draped out the open window, her fingers hanging loosely outside, brushing the air. That was when I felt it, a sensation in my back. Not pain exactly, more like pressure, or the faint awareness you get when someone is standing behind you. I had felt that same sensation before in other places, usually when someone was too close or staring at me from behind, but this time it came sharp and sudden, cutting through my focus like a blade. I told her to pull her hand back in, which she did without question. The moment her arm was inside, the feeling eased, but I couldn't shake it completely. I tried to ignore it, tried to let myself relax, but a few minutes later it returned. This time it felt stronger, sharper, like it was pushing into me instead of just hovering nearby. I didn't like it. I leaned forward, reached across her, and rolled up the window. The glass slid into place with a dull thud, sealing us in. I felt safer instantly, but at the same time, uneasy, like whatever was outside hadn't gone anywhere. I wanted to keep my mind off it, so I let myself get pulled back into the moment, but it wasn't long before the sensation came again. This time it was so strong it felt like electricity had touched my back. A jolt shot through me, and my entire body stiffened. It wasn't imagination anymore, it was real. I couldn't ignore it. My chest tightened, and I sat up straight, heart pounding harder than I wanted to admit. Without hesitation, I started the car. She looked at me, confused, her face half in shadow from the dimming light outside, but I didn't explain. I couldn't explain. All I knew was that something was wrong. Something was off in a way I couldn't put into words. I pressed down on the gas and headed back down the winding road. The headlights caught the gravel and the edges of trees, but nothing else. No animals, no people. Just the road dropping lower with every curve. By the time we got to my parents' house, the feeling had started to fade. Inside the safety of those walls, I convinced myself I had overreacted. I told myself it was just nerves, just the stillness of the woods playing tricks on me. We ate dinner, and for a little while it felt normal again. Laughter from the kitchen, the smell of food, the comfort of being back in a place where nothing bad could reach us. Later, we decided to leave. I walked her out to the car, the night air cooler now, crickets finally singing somewhere in the grass. I opened the passenger door for her, then started around the back of the car to get to the driver's side. That was when I saw it. Handprints. They were smeared along the back of the car, clear even in the weak light from the porch. The same pale brown color as the water in that puddle. My stomach dropped, and I froze where I stood. The prints weren't random either. They lined the car in a sequence, as if someone had crept along the side, one hand at a time, dragging themselves forward. The last one was the worst, up on the back window, smeared as if a palm had pressed hard against the glass while leaning forward, watching us inside. Cold washed through me, from my scalp all the way down to my toes. My body locked in place, every muscle tight, and I understood in that moment what had happened. We hadn't been alone. While we were in the car, lying across the seats, someone had been outside. Not standing off in the woods, not walking the trail, but right there with us. Close enough to touch, close enough to leave prints. The realization hit me like a strike of lightning, and I stumbled backward, my breath ragged. When she stepped out of the car and saw the prints, the look on her face told me she understood too. Neither of us said a word. We didn't have to. The night no longer felt like an ordinary night. It felt heavy, charged with the knowledge that someone had been inches away from us without us knowing. Watching, waiting, moving closer with every press of a hand against the car. I thought back to that strange water in the puddle, the way the sensation in my back had grown stronger each time, and the way it had finally burned like a live wire. My body had known before my mind did. I couldn't stop shivering. We didn't get back into the car right away. For a long moment, we just stood there under the dim porch light, staring at the smears on the paint, the trail of hands that told the story we didn't want to think about. Whoever it was, they had been there, silent, close, moving slowly toward the window where I sat. Eventually, I let her inside again. Neither of us wanted to drive off after seeing that. The rest of the night passed in a blur, but the image of those pale brown handprints stayed burned into my mind. I never forgot the feeling in my back, or how my instincts had been right even when I tried to ignore them. To this day, I don't know who it was up there on that mountain, or why they had followed us so closely, creeping right up to the glass. All I know is that we weren't alone, and the proof of that stayed smeared across the car until I finally washed it off the next day. Even then, the stains lingered faintly like a reminder. It wasn't a ghost story, and it wasn't imagination. It was real, and it taught me something I never forgot. That silence doesn't always mean safety, and when your body tells you something is wrong, you listen. I grew up in Big Canoe, Georgia, tucked deep in the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains where the woods seemed endless, and the air always carried the smell of pine and damp earth. Summers there were long and heavy with heat, but they carried a rhythm of their own. My sister and I had a routine during those months when school let out. We would ride our bikes a couple of miles downhill to the Jeep Trail, then cut across to the swim club. That pool was our whole world in the summer, a place where time stretched out into lazy afternoons, where kids splashed until their skin wrinkled and the sun sank behind the ridges. Getting there, though, was never just a casual ride. The trip meant weaving through narrow mountain roads shaded by trees so thick the sunlight barely touched the pavement, and sometimes it meant facing things that were bigger and stronger than us. We had our share of run-ins with bears. Black bears weren't unusual there. They showed up often enough to knock over trash cans or wander through yards looking for something to eat. People in town treated them like an inconvenience more than anything else, but for a kid on a bike, meeting one on a narrow road was something entirely different. You could tell yourself they were shy, that they'd rather run than fight, but when the only thing between you and a 400-pound animal was a squeaky huffy, the facts didn't feel very comforting. Most of the time they lumbered off, crashing through the brush in a noisy retreat, but even that kind of noise carried a weight that made my stomach twist. Every time I saw one, I felt the same mix of awe and fear, like the woods weren't quite ours no matter how many summers we rode through them. That summer afternoon started like all the others. The heat pressed down, the kind that makes asphalt sticky and air shimmer in waves. My sister and I left the house in our swimsuits with shirts and shorts pulled over, towels tucked under one arm, pedaling downhill with the kind of reckless speed only kids can get away with. The road wound down in curves, and the air rushing past felt cooler than it had at the house. The forest leaned over the road, branches stretching across in tangled arms, leaves fluttering just enough to make speckled patterns of light on the pavement. It was a familiar ride, one we had taken so many times it felt like second nature. Still, there was always a part of me that scanned the edges of the trees, listening for rustling or the sudden crack of branches. The ride down was easy, gravity doing most of the work. It was the ride back that was harder, especially the long hill that rose before the Jeep trail met the main stretch toward the clubhouse. On the way there, we usually coasted without a thought, knowing we'd have to face it on the return. But on that day, something about the woods felt different before we even reached the bottom. The air was thick and heavy, the kind that sticks to your skin and makes breathing a little harder. I noticed the birds first. Their songs, usually a constant background, seemed patchy, broken up by long stretches of silence. It wasn't enough to make me stop, but it sat somewhere in the back of my mind as we coasted down to the trail. When we reached the hill, we hopped off our bikes and started to push them upward, straining against the grade. The hill wasn't long, but it was steep enough that pedaling wasn't worth the effort. My sister walked a few feet ahead of me, the sound of her sneakers scuffing the pavement mixing with the rattle of her bike chain. My own breathing grew heavier, loud in my ears. That's when I heard it, the faintest sound behind us, low and measured. At first, I thought it was my own imagination, maybe the creak of my bike or the echo of our own steps bouncing strangely off the woods. But the more I listened, the clearer it became. Slow, quiet footsteps. Not on the pavement, but in the trees following the line of the road. I froze for half a second, trying to place the sound, and my stomach knotted in a way that felt different from how it did when we saw bears. Bears weren't quiet. They were clumsy in the brush, noisy as they pushed through undergrowth. This wasn't that. The steps were deliberate, each one landing with a weight that seemed carefully placed, like whatever it was wanted to stay hidden, but couldn't quite mask its presence completely. My skin prickled, every hair standing on end. I didn't say anything to my sister. I didn't need to. She must have heard it too because she slowed down and kept glancing toward the trees without turning her head fully. The forest on either side of us was thick, the ground uneven with rocks and roots, the undergrowth tangled. I scanned the shadows between the trunks, trying to catch movement, but there was nothing. Just the dark green and brown shapes of trees, the uneven light falling through the canopy. Still, the sound was there, keeping pace with us as we pushed uphill. The silence of the woods deepened. Even the cicadas, which usually screamed through the afternoons, seemed muted. The air felt heavier, pressing in on us, the kind of silence that wasn't peaceful but suffocating. My heart thumped hard against my ribs, every beat echoing in my throat. I kept pushing the bike, my legs shaking from more than just the hill. The sound of those steps matched our pace, slow and steady, close enough to know it wasn't far but far enough that we couldn't see it. Then came a sound that chilled me deeper than anything else, the faintest brush, like something exhaling, low and throaty, almost like a growl that never fully formed. It wasn't loud, but it slid through the silence like a blade. That's when it clicked in my mind. This wasn't a bear. Bears didn't move like that. Bears didn't breathe like that. What I was hearing belonged to something else, something that knew how to stalk. A cougar. A mountain lion. I had heard stories, but I had never believed they could be here. Yet the sound wrapped around me in a way that left no doubt. Every instinct in me screamed to run, to jump on the bike and tear down the road. But the hill was too steep. If we tried to pedal, we'd stall, and stopping halfway would be worse. So we pushed faster, each step dragging the bike forward, the weight of it cutting into my arms. My chest burned with effort, lungs pulling in hot, sticky air that didn't feel like enough. I kept my eyes on the strip of road ahead, forcing myself not to look back, because I knew if I saw even a glimpse of movement in those trees, my body might give out completely. At some point, the forest went absolutely still. The birds were gone, the insects hushed, even the rustle of leaves seemed to stop. It was the kind of silence that felt alive, like the whole forest was holding its breath. My sister and I were the only sounds, the scrape of shoes, the grind of tires against asphalt, the ragged pull of our breaths. And somewhere in the trees, that quiet shadow kept moving with us. When we reached the crest of the hill, adrenaline surged like a wave. Without a word, we jumped on our bikes, legs pumping, chains clattering as we forced the pedals down. The road sloped forward, and the bikes picked up speed quickly, gravity dragging us down. Wind whipped against my face, stinging my eyes, and I hunched low over the handlebars, riding the momentum as fast as I could. Every second felt stretched thin, stretched tight, like whatever had been following us was just one leap away. The clubhouse finally came into view, the bright shimmer of the pool flashing between the trees, the clearing opening up ahead. It felt like a finish line, like crossing into some invisible barrier of safety. We shot into the parking lot, skidding slightly as our tires hit gravel, and only when we rolled to a stop did I dare to glance back. The road behind us was empty. The trees stood still, their shadows deep and unmoving. But the silence still hung there, thick and heavy, as if something lingered just out of sight. We didn't go into the pool that day. We didn't even want to. The fear sat too close under our skin, prickling every time we thought about what might have been in those woods. That night, I lay awake replaying the sound of those footsteps, the low breath, the way the forest itself had seemed to vanish into silence. I couldn't shake the image of something sleek and powerful, watching us, measuring the distance, deciding whether to strike. We never saw it, but that was what made it worse. The not knowing. For the rest of that week, we stayed away from the pool, the thought of riding back down that road too much to face. I'd spent my whole childhood in those mountains, but after that day, I never looked at the woods the same way again. They weren't just a backdrop for our summers. They were alive, filled with things that could move through them without sound, things stronger and faster than us, things that didn't need to be seen to remind us that we were only visitors there. Even now, years later, I can still hear it if I think hard enough, that slow, deliberate step in the underbrush, keeping pace with us as we pushed our bikes up that hill in the Georgia heat. And I can still feel the silence, the weight of a predator just out of sight, reminding me that sometimes the scariest things are the ones you never actually see. I had been on the road for hours already, the kind of drive where time started to smear together into a haze of headlights, mile markers, and the steady hum of tires against cold asphalt. Winter break meant heading back to Franklin County, Pennsylvania, and I'd started from South Bend, Indiana earlier that morning. Normally, people I knew would just take the turnpike to save themselves the trouble, but I always liked the backroads better. Something about them felt more real, less like I was just being funneled along with the rest of the world. It was slower, sure, and sometimes it meant winding through towns that looked like they hadn't changed since the 1960s, but it gave me something different to look at. By the time I crossed into Pennsylvania, the daylight had already drained from the sky, leaving only that last thin line of gray above the horizon before night took over completely. The air outside was freezing, sharp enough that every time I cracked the window just to get a little fresh air, it stung my face like pins. I was tired, but I wasn't about to stop. I wanted to be home, to throw my bags inside, eat whatever leftovers were in the fridge, and finally sleep in my own bed again. The road I took, Route 641, wasn't really meant to be tackled casually at night, especially in December. It cut over Blue Mountain, and anyone who'd driven it knew about the hairpin turns that wrapped around the mountain's slope like some kind of twisted ribbon. In daylight, the view from the top was something worth pulling over for, looking out across the valleys that stretched endlessly, but in darkness it became something else entirely. The trees pressed in closer, their black forms leaning over the road, the only light coming from my headlights as they curved along the edges of the pavement. I reached the highest hairpin turn just past the county border, my headlights sweeping across the guardrail as I braked into it. The car felt steady enough, the tires gripping in spite of the patches of frost I could see glimmering on the asphalt. The guardrail gave way to pure darkness beyond it, a drop that I knew was hundreds of feet down, though the night made it look bottomless. I eased the car around the curve, and as soon as I straightened out onto the descending stretch of road, that's when I saw him. He appeared suddenly on the shoulder, right there on the edge where the pavement met the dirt, like he'd stepped out from the darkness itself. 1 second there was nothing but road and trees. The next there was a figure standing in the beams of my headlights. My reaction was pure instinct. I swerved, yanking the wheel left to keep from plowing into him. The tires squealed, the car jolted hard enough that my seatbelt bit into my shoulder, and for a second I felt the back end start to slip. My stomach dropped at the thought of the guardrail, the edge, the drop. Somehow I held it together, correcting just enough to keep the car straight and on the road. The man didn't move. He just stood there, his head turning toward me as I flew past. The look he gave me wasn't one of surprise or fear, the kind of expression you'd expect from someone nearly flattened by a car. It was different, almost deliberate, like he'd been waiting there all along and wanted me to see him. His face was pale in the headlights, his clothes dark and heavy, and before I could even take in more, the distance between us widened as my car sped downhill. My hands were shaking on the wheel, my heart thudding hard enough that I could hear it in my ears. I couldn't believe what had just happened. The first thought that shot through me was simple. What the hell was a man doing out here in mid-December, on the shoulder of a mountain road in the middle of the night? There were no houses nearby, no gas stations, no sidewalks. Nothing but woods and the steep slope falling away into blackness. I kept driving, forcing myself to focus on the road ahead, the curves, the patches of frost. My body was buzzing with adrenaline, my breathing shallow as though I'd just sprinted a mile. Part of me wanted to slam on the brakes, to stop and look back, maybe even ask if he needed help. But the bigger part of me couldn't get past that look he'd given me. It hadn't been the look of someone lost, or someone relieved to see another human being. It had been sharp, deliberate, like he wanted me to carry that image with me. The further I got from the spot, the more aware I became of just how alone I was out there. The road twisted and dropped, the forest on both sides pressing in so close that it felt like driving through a tunnel of black. My headlights barely cut into it, and the rearview mirror only reflected more darkness. I tried not to look at it too often, because every time I did, I half expected to see him there, standing in the middle of the road behind me, just staring. I drove faster than I should have, letting the curves throw me side to side in the seat, just wanting to get off the mountain. My thoughts kept circling, trying to make sense of him being there. Maybe he was a hunter, someone who'd parked somewhere off the road and gotten turned around. But no hunter I'd ever known walked along the shoulder of a road at night without so much as a flashlight. Maybe his car had broken down, but I hadn't seen anything pulled off to the side, no hazard lights blinking in the dark. By the time I reached the bottom of the mountain and the road began to straighten out, I realized I'd been gripping the wheel so tight that my knuckles were sore. My shoulders ached, locked up from the tension. I kept glancing at the clock on the dashboard, counting down the miles until I'd be back in familiar territory, away from the twisting isolation of the mountain road. The rest of the drive passed slower, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Every time I caught movement in the corner of my eyes, the sweep of shadows from the headlights, the rustle of bare branches swaying in the wind, I thought of that man again. The stillness of him, the way he had just appeared where no one should have been. I never saw him again, and when I finally pulled into my driveway back home, the relief that washed over me was heavier than I expected. Even inside my house, though, the memory stuck. I kept replaying it in my head, the swerve, the narrow miss, the expression on his face as I passed him. The questions about what he was doing there never really had an answer, and maybe they never would. But the truth was simple enough. A man had been standing on the shoulder of a mountain road in mid-December, and I'd nearly gone off the side, trying not to hit him. That was real, and that was enough. The road up Blue Mountain still runs the same way, twisting and sharp, bordered by forest and silence. I've driven it again since then, though not often, and never at night if I can help it. Every time I reach that hairpin turn at the top, I slow down more than I need to, my eyes searching the shoulder as I start the descent. I haven't seen him again, and maybe I never will. But the memory is enough to remind me that sometimes the strangest, most unsettling things aren't made-up stories or old legends. Sometimes they're just real people, in real places where they shouldn't be. And the part that unsettles me the most, even now, isn't just that he was there. It's that look he gave me, like he'd been waiting for me to come around that curve, like he'd known I would. That's the part one can't explain, and maybe I don't want to. I still remember that night in 2007 more clearly than almost anything else that's ever happened to me, like a scar burned into my memory that refuses to fade. At the time, I was the one who always volunteered to be the designated driver, partly because I didn't really care for drinking, and partly because I liked being the one who had my head on straight when things got chaotic. My boyfriend and I had been out with friends, and while they all stumbled and laughed through the night, I stayed stone sober, making sure everyone got home in one piece. By the time we finally made it back to his parents' place in southern West Virginia, it was past midnight. The air had that heavy Appalachian stillness to it, the kind of quiet that seems to hum in your ears. His parents were out of town for the weekend, so the place was dark and silent when we pulled in. The house sat tucked back in a holler, cradled at the bottom of a mountain with a fenced-in half-acre yard that sloped upward behind it. It was the kind of place where the night could feel endless. A black curtain pulled over the world with no streetlights, no passing cars, and no noise but whatever lived in the woods. He was pissed drunk by then, barely able to walk straight. I got him into the house, guided him down the hallway, and made sure he collapsed safely into bed. Once I knew he wasn't about to roll out or choke in his sleep, I decided I needed a breather myself. My nerves were buzzing from the drive and the responsibility of wrangling him. I stepped out the back door with a cigarette in hand, not bothering with the light. It was Appalachia dark out there, the kind of dark where even your own hand is nothing but a shadow a foot from your face. The only bit of light was from the moon, which hung low and hazy above the tree line. I sat down on the old wooden porch swing, the chains creaking softly under my weight, and lit up. The first drag filled my chest and calmed me a little. The smell of tobacco mixed with damp earth and the faint sweetness of wild plants carried from the hillside. The night was thick, still, and silent except for the occasional cricket. I sat there for maybe a minute or two, staring off into the black slope of the yard where the fence disappeared into the trees. And then it came. A sound ripped out from the darkness, about 100 feet away. At first my brain didn't even know how to process it. It sounded like a woman being torn apart, like someone screaming from the pit of their lungs in absolute terror and pain. It wasn't just a scream. It was raw, guttural, and sharp all at once, climbing up and down in pitch. Every hair on my body stood straight up. I felt my blood freeze in place. I don't think I've ever moved faster in my life. I flung the cigarette to the ground and bolted for the door, yanking it shut behind me as if slamming it could shut out whatever I had just heard. My hands shook as I fumbled for the light switch, and I flicked on the porch floodlight. The yard came into view all at once, and what I saw didn't even make sense at first. Pacing back and forth inside the fence was the biggest black cat I had ever seen in my life. It wasn't a house cat, and it sure as hell wasn't a dog. This thing was long, muscular, and moved with that unmistakable feline slink, its shoulders rolling under its skin like coiled springs. Its fur gleamed dark under the floodlight, jet black and sleek. Its tail whipped like a whipcord, thick and long. It was a panther, a huge black panther, and it was screaming. The sound that had made me think someone was being murdered was coming from its throat. It screeched, wailed, and growled, all twisted together into something that didn't sound real. The animal paced frantically, darting left and right along the inside of the fence, as if it couldn't figure out how to get out. Every time it hit the fence, it turned sharply, slamming its body into another direction. Its eyes flashed under the light, reflecting pale green. I stood there frozen in the doorway, unable to look away. My chest was tight, my mouth dry, and my pulse hammered against my temples. It wasn't just fear, it was disbelief. My brain was struggling to put the pieces together. I'd grown up hearing stories about big cats in the Appalachian hills, whispers about painters or panthers, but most people said it was just folklore, that they weren't really around here anymore. Yet here it was, alive, massive, and 100 feet from where I had just been sitting alone in the pitch black. I watched it for what felt like forever, though it couldn't have been more than a minute or two. It clawed at the dirt, screamed again, then ran the length of the yard and back, its body low to the ground like a spring ready to snap. Every sound it made rattled in my chest, sharp and alien. It was the kind of noise that made the primitive part of your brain scream at you to get inside, lock the doors, and pray. Eventually, after more frantic pacing, it seemed to figure out the fence wasn't really trapping it. With one smooth leap, it cleared the wooden boards and landed gracefully on the other side, vanishing into the tree line like smoke. Just like that, it was gone. The screaming stopped, and the night fell silent again, as if nothing had ever happened. I stayed plastered to the door for a long time, staring into the woods with every muscle tense, waiting for some sign of movement. The silence was almost worse than the noise had been. The weight of what I had just seen pressed down on me, heavy and surreal. My cigarette still smoldered on the porch, forgotten where I had dropped it. My boyfriend slept inside, blissfully oblivious, and I was left alone with the kind of memory that no one would ever really believe. The rest of the night, I didn't leave the house. I sat awake for hours, every creak and rustle outside making my skin crawl. I knew what I had seen, knew what I had heard, and yet the idea of trying to explain it to anyone felt impossible. A huge black panther, screaming like a person, trapped in the backyard fence. It sounded insane when said out loud, but I can still picture it perfectly, the rolling shoulders, the gleam of its eyes, the raw, bone-deep terror of its cry. Over the years, I told the story a handful of times. Most people laughed it off or nodded politely, clearly not buying it. A few said maybe it was a bobcat, maybe a coyote, maybe my imagination. Only one person ever looked at me with wide eyes and said they believed me. And maybe that's why it's burned so deep into my memory. It wasn't just the fear of that night. It was the knowledge that I had brushed up against something wild, something powerful, something most people will never see in their lifetime. I can still smell the cigarette smoke hanging in the cold air, feel the rough wood of the porch swing under my hand, and hear the echo of that scream bouncing off the mountainside. It's been years, but I know with absolute certainty what I saw. The night was quiet, the world asleep, and in that moment, I came face to face with a predator that shouldn't have been there, yet was. That was the night I learned the mountains keep their secrets, and sometimes, if you're unlucky enough, they show them to you. I've spent my whole life tucked into the folds of far southwest Virginia, where the hills roll on for miles, the roads twist tighter than coiled rope, and the hollers stretch out like secrets only locals know how to find. Around here, there isn't much to do unless you make something out of nothing. When I was younger, we'd take off down old gravel roads just to see where they led, with no real destination in mind. Even now, as an adult, that habit has stuck with me. Some days, I just climb into my truck, turn down a road I haven't been on in a while, and let it carry me as far as I feel like going. It was one of those days, the kind where the sky looked heavy with clouds, but hadn't yet decided whether it wanted to rain. The air was thick, humid in that way it always is in late summer, where it feels like the mountains are sweating right along with you. I had nothing on the agenda, so I filled my thermos with some lukewarm coffee, rolled down the windows, and started out. The gravel crunched under the tires, echoing off the ridges, and every once in a while I'd see a rabbit dart across or a hawk glide down into a field. I was way back off the main highway, probably 8 or 9 miles down a road that wound so tightly you could hardly see 20 feet ahead before it curved again. These roads are narrow, hemmed in by ditches on one side and steep banks or drop-offs on the other, the kind where if another car came, one of you would have to back up a long way before there was room to pass. But I liked that kind of driving. It felt like slipping off into a different world where no one could bother you. The further I went, the quieter it got. No houses, no barns, not even the scattered mailboxes you sometimes see hanging crooked at the edge of the gravel. Just thick woods crowding in close, with trees leaning over the road like they wanted to shake hands across it. The deeper I went, the more I realized I hadn't seen another soul for miles. No four-wheelers buzzing, no kids fishing along the creeks. Just me, the road, and the steady hum of the truck. It must have been an hour or more into the ride when I came around a bend that opened up a little stretch of straight road. That's when I saw them. At first, I thought it was fog hanging low to the ground, the way it sometimes does when the creek cuts close to the road and the air cools against the water. But as I eased forward, my eyes adjusted and I realized it wasn't fog at all. It was people, a whole group of them. There were at least 10, maybe more, all dressed in white robes that hung to their ankles. They were walking in a slow, steady line right down the middle of the gravel road, heading in the same direction I had been going, towards where the creek curved off through the woods. For a second, my mind froze up trying to make sense of it. White robes, out here in the middle of nowhere. It didn't fit. The truck crawled forward another few feet, and that's when one of them turned their head just slightly, enough that I caught the pale outline of their face against the robe. My stomach dropped. Something about the way they all moved together, quiet, slow, not saying a word, sent a chill right up my back. It didn't look like a family out for a stroll. It didn't look like kids playing dress-up. It looked organized. I don't know what came over me, but I slipped the truck into reverse without even thinking and started backing up. The crunch of the gravel seemed louder than it should have been, rattling in my ears as my tires chewed at the stones. I kept my eyes forward, locked on that group, watching their white shapes get smaller as I put distance between us. They didn't stop. They didn't wave. They didn't even look my way again. They just kept walking down the road, like I wasn't even there. My heart was hammering in my chest, and my palms were slick on the steering wheel. I didn't stop backing up until I'd rounded a curve and lost sight of them completely. Only then did I throw it into drive, spin the wheel, and take the first side road I could find that would point me back towards town. I didn't look in the rearview mirror once. By the time I finally made it back onto the highway, my nerves were still rattling. I pulled off at a gas station just to steady myself, grabbed a cold drink, and sat there with the truck idling, trying to figure out what I'd just seen. My mind went through every possibility. A cult? Some secret gathering? Maybe a reenactment of some kind? None of it added up. Who would pick a gravel road out in the middle of nowhere to walk in white robes like that? And why so silent, so deliberate in the way they moved? That night, lying in bed, the image of them kept replaying in my head. The line of white robes against the dark gravel, the way they never acknowledged me, the quiet that hung heavier than the humidity in the air. It wasn't until a few days later, after talking to an older neighbor, that it finally clicked. I mentioned it to him offhand, careful not to sound like I was spooked, just curious. He chuckled and said it sounded like I'd stumbled onto a baptism. That's when it hit me. Of course. Out here, baptisms in the creek are as old as the hills themselves. Whole congregations will come out, dressed in white, to walk down to the water together. It's a ritual, something folks have done for generations. The memory of that day softened in my head after that. What had felt like something dark, even sinister in the moment, revealed itself for what it probably was: a group of people walking towards the creek for something meaningful, something spiritual, something they didn't need outsiders like me gawking at. Still, the feeling I had in that moment has never left me. Because when you're alone on a back road, miles from anywhere, and you round a curve to see a silent line of people in white robes moving steadily ahead, it doesn't matter what the explanation is. Your body reacts before your mind can reason it out. Fear doesn't wait for logic. It just grabs hold of you, and by the time you've run from it, the truth comes later. Now, when I drive those roads, I still think about that day. The gravel, the still air, the sudden appearance of figures dressed alike, moving as one. I know what it probably was, but I also know how it felt. And sometimes, how something feels in the moment is just as real as what it turns out to be.